Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 111, East Exit. The remainder of the trip was not as arduous as the first half. Part of that was due to the caravan we crossed paths with in midpoint. Like us, they braved the dark and fought off the creatures. The beasts of the dark would return, given enough time, but most were cleared from our path. Still, it wasn't without its difficulty. 2 more merchants were forced to flee when a lava salamander surprised the group. Ska and I were able to kill it while the rest of the guards protected the remaining people. Nobody else was strong enough to deal with the level 20 creature. And it wasn't like Ska or I escaped unscathed. Ska was missing patches of hair where the beast's breath scorched it away. I fared better with my armor and buffs, but my eyebrows were singed off when my helmet shield failed. I was lucky enough to dodge out of the path of the lava stream before it burned my face off. My helmet was completely ruined though. Had Fiona been able to assist, we could have taken down the creature without any wounds, but I wanted her to hang back and remain out of sight. The wounds were quickly healed, but the hair and fur would have to grow back naturally. As for my helmet, I had to pull out my old one. The shield on it was subpar, but it was better than leaving my noggin exposed. On tired feet, we finally stepped out of the final tunnel and into East Exit. Like the other town, it was bustling. Trade went both ways, but I wasn't sure why merchants would brave the journey to West Exit to sell goods. I'm sure Frotsar would have been able to explain the intricacies of commerce to me if he were around. Seeing as we were finally out of the tunnel, I stored my weapon and armor. It felt good to be free of the items and I stretched. Ska joined me a minute later. We had been paid and it was time to check out the area. As we walked out of the embarkment area, an altercation off to the side drew my attention. "Paul, behind you!" Fiona screamed. I jerked my head around in time to see a man stabbing at me with an obviously enchanted sword. The blade looked like mother of pearl and it flickered an iridescent color. Unfortunately, that was all I had time to learn as the blade slammed into my body like a freight train. I was sent hurtling back from the blow, but from the pain over my entire body, I could tell my necklace activated. I wasted no time getting to my feet and identifying my attackers. Ska was fighting off 2 others and it looked like Fiona was keeping another busy. Only one man was running at me and I used Identify on him as I re-equipped my armor and weapon. Randy Cotton Fatespinner / Tempus Mech 23/15. Fuck. The man lunged at me and I twisted my staff to intercept his strike. But something weird happened. His blade was now farther back and my staff swiped empty air. A cold sweat ran down my spine as I tried to twist out of the path of his blade. The weapon pierced through my armor shield like it wasn't even there. Only the quality of my armor saved me from being impaled. I still felt one of my ribs crack from the strength of the blow and once again I was sent tumbling to the ground. I scrambled up, but the man was on me and I was forced to activate Blink Step to gain some distance and heal myself. The man flicked his blade and a crescent of pearlescent light intercepted my path, forcing me to dodge the attack. This seemed to be what he had expected as he was on me again. Even with Blink Step active, I was barely able to keep his weird blows from striking me. Every time I tried to attack him with magic, he flicked the blade of energy out to intercept the attack. The energy seemed to cancel out any magic it came into contact with and my fear only grew. The man was silent, he didn't banter or bandy words. He didn't demand an explanation or threaten me, he only attacked. I could tell I wasn't going to win this fight, but I couldn't break free. Even if I could, I couldn't leave Ska and Fiona here. Somehow the man had learned I was going here and set this trap. It wasn't hard to guess that it probably had something to do with his first class. I was still trying to figure out his second class, but the word sounded similar to temporal. A class with an ability to control time would definitely explain the weird attacks I was unable to block. I was running out of time and ideas, so far I had been on the defensive. I had imbued my staff with lightning and water, but those attacks seemed to be useless as the sword simply nullified them as he parried my blows. Even worse, the sword was non-metallic, meaning the energy of the lightning wouldn't reach him anyway. I tried activating the ring of temporal skip I had. The man's eyes enlarged slightly as I activated the ring, but I didn't go anywhere. In fact, I felt like I was slowing down. I turned my head to yell for the others to run, but a blinding pain hit me in the mouth. I stumbled to the side as blood poured down my chest from my ruined jaw. I cast Area of Denial, relying on my trump card as I summoned the token from my ring. But the man knew. A flick of his sword popped my defensive spell like a balloon, severing my main hand with little effort. I could only look on in horror as a fountain of blood poured out. My hand, along with my staff, went sailing off into the surrounding mayhem. The entire square had turned into a battlefield as what I could only assume were Randy's men, ruthlessly slaughtered anyone. Some people fought back but were quickly cut down. I couldn't even see Fiona or Ska in the surrounding violence. I stumbled away, holding my bleeding stump. I didn't get far before a searing pain tore through one of my legs, causing me to fall to the ground. On instinct, I used my hands to brace for the fall. The pain of hitting my open wound on the ground almost made me black out. But I was no stranger to pain and I forced myself to stay conscious. The man finally chose this time to speak. "You are a hard man to track down. Did you think you could run and hide from me forever? No, you were trying to gain strength and take me on, weren't you? As if I would let you. This is for my brother and niece." I felt the cold blade repeatedly slam into my torso and I choked up blood as my lungs were perforated by the angry man's blade. All strength left my body as I collapsed to the ground. I felt cold and my vision went dark. "You have died. Second chance has activated. Indomitable has activated, removing the bleed debuff." The monotone grey of death was replaced by the vibrant color of life as my skill activated along with my 2 rings on my other hand. I could only lay there though as the pain was immense. A foot rolled me over and I was face to face with Randy Cotton. "Don't think your little skill will get you out of it this time," he stated with a grim smile. "This is for wasting my time." He pulled his blade back for another attack but he leaped to the side as a ghostly sword tried to skewer him. He wasn't completely successful at avoiding Fiona's strike though. A pained grimace blossomed on his face as Fiona pressured him back. I could only watch impotently as I struggled to even rise from the ground. "Ska, get him out of here." A moment later Ska was by my side. He lifted me onto his shoulder and slammed a health injector into my leg as he rushed out of the square. I heard an angry roar and had enough energy to look up as the entire square froze grey, like my death vision. Everything besides Randy and Fiona was frozen by the effect. Ska and I were far enough away to avoid the effect. My only guess was some sort of temporal lock, and since Fiona was undead, was not subject to the whims of time like mortals. The fact that Fiona was unaffected only slowed Randy down a few seconds as he renewed his attacks against her, starting to push her back. She finally disengaged just before we rounded a corner. "Find them!" Randy roared, "Do not let them escape." 3 of his commanders ran after the 2 that escaped. Meanwhile Randy pulled out an item. He spoke a trigger word and tossed it into the air. A flash of golden light spread out but he got no indication that the spectre had been banished. He gripped his sword tight enough to turn his knuckles white. The bitch had allowed that bug to escape and now she had fled as well. His abilities had not warned him about her presence. And only his skill and battle intuition had saved him from a deadly blow. He still felt the deathly cold that radiated from his side from one attack. He would not let this man escape. The town was locked down and his men were sieging the walls. If he had to kill every single person in this shithole to get his prize, he would gladly do it. He flicked out his sword at a local that rushed at him, bisecting the man with little effort. The battle in the courtyard was winding down and only 3 of his men had died. That damn half-breed was a far more competent fighter than he had given it credit for. And the spectre, while a decent fighter, seemed to have some limitations that his men were able to exploit, preventing her from killing more than one of them. Randy stomped off after his commanders, the rest of his men following behind. Ska was breathing hard after running for 10 minutes. He had finally lost the 3 men chasing them but he had to stop. Paul was bleeding again and had passed out from his wounds. Ska set him down and pulled out a bandage to wrap around his missing hand. He also jabbed another healing injector into his leg. Fiona appeared while he was doing this. "We have to get him out of here," she said. "I know," he hissed, "but where to go? I can hear fighting at the wall and we won't remain hidden for long." "Break his token and send him back to West Exit," Fiona said quickly. Ska had completely forgotten about the tokens. He quickly searched Paul for his but couldn't find it. "It is not here, it must have been in his ring," Ska growled softly. I woke up but I wish I hadn't, the pain was intense. I still couldn't speak as my jaw was mangled from the fight. I could hear Ska and Fiona speaking, then Ska roughly fumbled around my body looking for something. "Down here!" I heard someone yell. Ska hissed, then shoved something in my hand. I only had a second to realize it was his return token. I tried to resist but he forced my hand to crush the token. There was a bright flash and I found myself bleeding on the ground in West Exit. A startled scream was all I heard before I passed out. "He is safe, we must flee," Ska stated, already rushing away from the 3 men chasing them. The city wasn't like the forest, but he could easily scale the wood building and outmaneuver these men. Fiona kept up and watched his back as he made his way back toward the tunnel entrance. Randy backhanded the man so hard he broke his hand. He ignored the pain, while the man got back to his feet. I told you not to let him escape. Explain why you disobeyed my order. The half-breed had some sort of teleportation item and shoved it into our target's hand before we were able to stop him. Randy clenched his jaw, making his teeth creak. He had utilized his class skill Twist of Fate to bring this encounter to reality. The cost had been staggering, a full level, and it didn't guarantee success. Still, he had come so close to victory. Severing that man's hand should have prevented any escape option. The fact that his cohort sacrificed his own ability to escape, for Paul, was infuriating. His second class had easily shined in the fight. The Tempus Mech or Temporal Sword class made use of tiny tricks of time to confuse your opponent or redirect your strikes to be more advantageous. Since getting the class, Randy had not lost a single battle or even taken a wound. Top that off with his prismatic rapier, and very few could stand up to him for long. The rapier had been hard to acquire but worth it in the end. Its ability to pierce any magic was unmatched. It also had the prismatic wave ability. And what about the other 2? They fled back to the tunnel where we lost them. Ack! Randy screamed, letting his blade tear through the surprised man. The bisected man fell to the ground. Go after them, kill them both, and don't bother to return if you can't complete a simple task like that. The remaining 2 men nodded and rushed off to the tunnel. Gather up the rest of the men, it's time to leave before the city realizes we are here. The man nodded, and within minutes they made their way through the city into a hidden exit. I woke up an undetermined time later. While I didn't feel 100%, I did feel better. I looked around, I was in some sort of room, and when I tried to sit up, found myself handcuffed to a railing. Good, you're awake. We have some questions for you. I blearily looked over to an austere woman sitting in a chair along the wall. She was wearing some sort of robe, but my head was too fuzzy to even identify, so I just collapsed back on the bed. Who are you? I said through parched lips. You can call me Miss Farley. Now, how did you end up in the state you were in? Attacked, I managed to mumble out. Could I get some water? In time. Attacked by what? No, there was an attack, in East Exit. The woman froze and looked at me. Who attacked the city? And why? The Black Dragon, a nasty organization from the Chicago area. I think they were after me. You, why you? It's a long story, can I please get some water? I plead, my mouth feeling like a desert. I heard her get up and walk over to a table, pouring a glass of water. She then walked up to the bed and I was forced to sit up and take small sips. When my thirst was sufficiently quelled, I flopped back into the bed. I heard her sit back down. Time for that story, she stated flatly. I recounted most of how I knew the Black Dragon, but I kept some things to myself. Eventually, the woman left me to rest. I jerked up on my remaining hand, the handcuff securing me to the hospital bed clanked. Since the woman was gone, I used my healing spells to rid myself of any remaining injuries. My hand didn't reform and it felt like something was blocking it from regrowing. I quickly checked through my status log to see what happened during the fight. Your hand has been severed by fate. I didn't know what it meant, but I could guess it wasn't anything good. I reached into my pants and grabbed my backup storage ring, sliding it onto my finger. It contained a few items of importance. One was a house token, bound to me. It would allow me to unlock the fortress. Considering my tattoo was on my missing hand, I was glad I had a backup. Thankfully the tattoo was useless now that it was disconnected from my body. It couldn't be activated externally. I had learned that from my rigorous testing on trying to reinforce my body. The next item was my spare staff. I wasn't sure how effective I would be off-handed, but I could probably get by for now. There was a supply of healing and monoregan items. I also had food and water and a backup set of armor. Although the armor wasn't as good as the damaged set I still wore. The last item was a locator token. It was a feature I had built into my tattoo as well and would allow me to get the direction of anyone that had access to my fortress. I fed some mana into the featureless piece of metal and it lit up like a radar. I saw 2 distinct directions displayed. One was to the south and one was to the east. I let out a sigh of relief. This meant Ska was still alive. If he were dead, the indicator wouldn't show up for him. I had to assume Fiona was with him as I couldn't tattoo a ghost. I put the item back in my ring and activated Godly Might. The strength boost allowed me to easily rip the pre-system handcuffs apart. I wouldn't have bothered, but I didn't know how long I had been unconscious. It felt like days. I didn't want to remain here where Randy and his goons might show up at any minute, and I was in no condition to try and find Ska and Fiona. As long as those two stuck together, they could find me. Fiona seemed to always know where I was, due to our bond. I stood up and walked over to a window. When I looked out, I saw I was on the 3rd floor of some building. It appeared I was still in West Exit. I threw open the window and jumped out, activating my wings and blink step. I flew directly south, avoiding the wall and the guards. With triple casting the skills and downing a few mana potions, I was able to get to the sparse forest edge. I stumbled as I landed, hitting my injured arm on a tree and sending a spike of pain up my arm. I grimaced from the pain but kept running. My escape hadn't gone unnoticed. By the time I got to the fortress, I was sweating and dizzy. The stitches in my hand had broken open and blood was soaking my bandaged stump. I fed some mana to the token and the exterior door of the fortress opened. I ran inside and quickly shut the door behind me. I only had a minute or so before my pursuers caught up. I opened the inner door and rushed to the command center. I quickly powered up the fortress and engaged the cloak. I set it to hover 30 feet into the air, to avoid detection. Just in time, it seemed, as a group of people rounded the valley entrance and came to a stop. My whole body was shaking from exertion and blood loss. I used the time to catch my breath and sit down. Exhaustion eventually claimed me and I passed out in the command chair. Chapter 112, Damage Control. The sound of dripping woke me from my slumber. I cracked open my eyes, barely able to turn my head. Everything felt fuzzy. When I looked down, I saw the reason for the dripping noise. A large pool of blood was staining the floor, and a quick look showed that my stump had continued to leak blood after I had passed out. Going by the size of the pool, I must have been unconscious for at least a few hours. I injected another health potion, but that was only a stopgap. I needed to deal with the issue. I glanced at the viewer. It showed that the valley was empty. Footprints blanketed the ground, but the people must have left before the cloak ran out of power. I decided to set the fortress back down and engage the shield. That would give me 5 or 6 hours until I had to worry, assuming nobody came by and attacked. With that done, I slowly stood on weak legs. I had to brace myself using my staff, but I made my way to the kitchen. There I turned on the electric stove and let the element heat up. I didn't have the knowledge or skills to seal off the stump with stitches, so this was the only other option I could think of. I had thought about just cutting the arm off higher up, but something told me that wouldn't fix the issue caused by Randy Cotton's skill. When the burner was red hot, I stuck a chunk of wood in my mouth, grabbed a health injector, in my good hand, and shoved the stump against the burner. I screamed as my flesh sizzled, but I was able to stay conscious through the pain. The end result looked awful, but it no longer bled. I went and retrieved some anti-burn ointment and slathered a liberal amount onto the area before I fumbled with gauze and a bandage. The wound throbbed, but the system and my pain tolerance made it bearable. I wiped the sweat from my forehead as I went to the fridge and grabbed some food. I was so hungry I didn't bother getting a plate or silverware. I simply shoved my hand into the food and shoveled it into my mouth. I woke up on the kitchen floor, not even remembering having passed out. The blood loss was affecting me severely, but looking around I saw that no more blood was soaking the floor or me. I also felt slightly better. The food I had eaten must have helped. That made me remember Bella. I pulled her from her storage and she seemed distraught at my condition. "It's okay, I'll be fine, just keep watch and make sure nobody gets in." She gave a squawk in response. I gave a half-hearted smile as I made my way to my bed. This fight would leave me weakened for days. Once inside the room, I set the tracking plate on the table next to the bed and activated it. Still 2 signals. It looked like Ska and Fiona were heading west. I realized they must have entered the tunnels again. I hoped they would be okay. As soon as I lay my head on the pillow, I fell asleep. The next time I woke up, my condition had improved. I wasn't as lightheaded and my mind felt much clearer. My head was clear enough that I realized how much of a monumental idiot I had been. I made a fundamental mistake in thinking my enemies would simply wait around or that they didn't have another way to find me. Randy and the Black Dragon had already proven that they were resourceful enough to track my movements once before. I should have expected the attack. The whole "let's check out this tunnel through the mountain" scenario was not something I would have done. I didn't care what was on the other side of the mountain, only that there was a path through. The only thing that made sense was fate spinner magic. It made me realize just how powerful and insidious the magic that Randy Cotton used was. I hadn't thought anything was odd about my actions, but Fiona had pointed out my actions were weird and out of place, to the point she asked me about it. How do you begin to even fight against someone who can bend fate to their whim? Then again, a spell of that magnitude must be costly. I knew spells could utilize other resources as payment for activation. My aura of rage was a prime example of that. Unfortunately, I didn't know what it cost or how often he could use it. I needed to be extra vigilant. I also needed to heed my friend's advice. I checked the tracker and noticed the bar moved slightly to the west. I had to assume they were still traveling through the tunnel. I slammed my good hand down on the table in frustration, knowing there wasn't anything I could do. Even if I entered the tunnel again, it would be a week before I could join up with them. In my state, I didn't hold out much hope that I would be any help. I had to trust in their abilities and prepare for when they arrived. I went to my workroom and created another defensive necklace. Randy Cotton's attack had destroyed the first item. Rune crafting with my offhand was a major pain in the ass. Only my high agility allowed me to make a passable item. It was considerably weaker than my previous attempt. I sighed, I would need to practice quite a bit more to bring my offhand up to my former quality. I inspected the final result. Necklace of Force Attenuation. Quality, average. Description: this necklace redirects 60% of the force of one attack to the whole body. 40% magic resistance. It would have to do. I slipped the item on and pushed it under my shirt. Next, I took a look at my armor. It was in rough shape. The back had 6 gaping holes where he had stabbed me repeatedly. Even the front was damaged to a lesser extent. A row of mithril plates was slightly bent from absorbing the initial blow. The cut continued onto the open leather, leaving a ragged-looking slice that was barely stopped. I still had a minor hitch from the broken rib. I couldn't do anything about the damage right now, so I rinsed the blood off and tried to slip the armor back on. Unfortunately, this proved impossible without my ring to assist. Untying the straps had been a chore, but readying them so the armor was tight was a nightmare. I gave up and stored the armor for now. Without a second hand, I was going to be nearly useless. I would have to buy another ring to replace the one I lost or figure out what to do to shore up my disability. Making a rune-crafted hand seemed like the quickest approach to solving my problem. I couldn't manufacture anything too complex with the materials I had available, but I didn't need to be complex. I sketched out a design that utilized an arm brace that we had for setting broken bones and 6 bars of stellium. The bars would act like fingers and thumb. Really, I only needed 3, but I had another idea. It took a bit of digging to find the storage ring where I stuck the extra stellium. I stuck it in the small bandsaw in the workroom and cut up the 6 bars. Each bar was half an inch wide, a quarter inch thick, and 6 inches long. It was overkill for a temporary prosthetic, but that was fine. Simple movement runes were easy for me to produce. I had used those on the outer doors of the fortress. Attaching all the fingers to the arm brace was a far larger challenge. I muddled through it and eventually got them all attached. Activating the fingers turned out to be too difficult. They all wanted to activate at once. It took me some fiddling before I came up with a solution. I now sported 6 tattoos, 1 for each finger. I could control each individually or with a bit of effort more than one at a time. I had to thank my high intelligence stat for this. I don't think I would have been able to pull it off otherwise. I clicked together 3 of the fingers, testing the functionality. I could hold my staff, but I wouldn't be holding anything delicate with the hand. Fine motor control just wasn't possible. Now that I knew the hand would function, I started adding the other runes. This process took a few days. I had to eat and rest as my body was still trying to recover from the blood loss. Each morning I checked the radar to see if Ska and Fiona were okay. The mark was slowly creeping west. They should be at the first fortress, I mumbled. I got out of bed and strapped the arm on. The process took a good 10 minutes, with me fumbling for the hard-to-reach clips. But I got it done. I tested the connection to each finger, then flipped them all back so they sat along my arm. Then I walked to the command room. The shield was nearly depleted, just from sitting around, but I didn't have the time or energy to recharge it. Seeing as nobody had attacked and the remote viewer showed the area around the fortress to be empty, I turned off the shield. I spent the next few hours recharging the shield crystal and the cloak crystal. I checked the remote viewer one last time before I powered off the fortress and headed outside. There was no point wasting the little remaining mana on the shield. It wouldn't last more than an hour with its current charge. I walked for 15 minutes before I found a small grove of trees. The short walk had tired out my healing body and I had to wipe away a sheen of perspiration. This is far enough, I can test it here, I said with a tired sigh. I was wearing my armor but it wasn't strapped down properly. I wanted to avoid any fighting if possible, but at least I had my shield if worse came to worst. I was surprised the shield still functioned due to the damage, but the properly enhanced mithril was strong stuff and not even that damn magic-defying sword had been able to pierce it. I flexed my mechanical fingers again, making sure everything was functioning. Then I clicked all 6 into a forward-facing direction. They formed a rough tube. Energy began to crackle between the openings of the fingers and a blue glow quickly formed within the center. I aimed my arm towards a tree and sent the signal to fire. A burst of mana from the mana heart situated in the bottom center of the opening drained completely. A lance of blue light ripped through the air, missing the tree and continuing on until it struck another tree 40 feet farther away. The tree exploded into splinters where the beam of focused mana struck and came crashing down as the remaining portion could no longer hold it. While my aim was atrocious, the results spoke for themselves. I hadn't wanted to reveal the fact that I was able to recreate the mana cannons, but I needed something to shore up my weakness. This wasn't a rapid-fire weapon though, as I could already feel the heat from just one shot. I figured I might get 3 or 4 shots before I had to let it cool down. People would probably mistake the blue glow and energy discharge between the fingers as part of the build-up to fire, but they would be wrong. That was just the runic containment array that focused the mana. I wasn't sure how the original mana cannon builders did it, but my method worked fine. With time I might be able to tweak it to make it invisible, but that was far off. I quickly recharged the mana heart and fired again and again. It took me about 6 seconds to recharge the crystal, which seemed like a long time considering it only held 50 mana, but the conversion rate was garbage and it cost me 200 mana just to fill it once. I deactivated the containment field and folded away 3 fingers. Thankfully, I could keep a charge ready in the crystal. 2 more attacks in battle seemed like a reasonable option, any more than that, and I would be running on fumes. I tried practicing with my staff in my new hand, but it didn't have the flexibility or range of motion required to do much more than hold the staff. I also couldn't feed mana through the hand and into the staff, so activating the runes was impossible. Instead, I swapped it back to my remaining hand and practiced with that. My new hand wasn't useless though. I had 2 modes, Crushing Grasp and Shield. Crushing Grasp was just me pushing as much power into the hand as possible to break whatever I was holding. 20 mana could crush a stone, so it was highly effective. The shield mode just spread the fingers out like a fan and allowed me to partially block stuff with it. I could also use it as an improvised mace if I really wanted to. Not that I thought it would be very effective. I returned to the fortress after my tests and practice. I had one more thing I wanted to add to the hand. I had to dig through a bunch of crates before I found what I was looking for. Martin and Scar really did pack all kinds of shit. I attached the laser pointer to my arm and connected it to the power rune for the weapon. Now I shouldn't have any problem hitting what I was aiming at. Chapter 113, The Wait. I spent the next couple of days training with my hand and my staff. I still didn't feel comfortable that I could match my previous ability. I had to face facts. I was afraid. I was afraid that Randy Cotton had followed Ska and Fiona into the tunnel. They were still moving from what I could tell, but that meant little. If he was truly following them and I was forced to fight, I would die. There was no doubt about that. Dying to save my friends was a noble endeavor but also a futile one. I doubted that Randy Cotton would stop at just me. I needed to utilize the advantages I had. That meant waiting and worrying that Ska and Fiona wouldn't return safely. The worry was eating me up inside, and on more than one occasion I had to extract a deformed piece of dining ware from my metal hand. Sitting around and waiting was killing me, so I got to work. I slaved the mana cannons on the fortress to 1 control. It wouldn't allow me to aim them, but that was fine. It was just another extra layer to the defenses. I spent 2 days aligning the weapons to all aim at a small area, roughly 30 degrees down from the fortress. My plan was to vaporize anyone chasing Fiona and Ska after they exited the tunnel. I realized the plan had a lot of holes in it. But it was the best I could come up with at the time. Gathering the locals to help drive off Randy and his forces was an option, but one I had little faith in working. The highest levels I had spotted were 14. Enough of those would make a difference, but Randy had no qualms about attacking East Exit with his forces. I had to assume he had enough men to counter any force I could gather against him. Plus I was pretty sure the city was still angry with me for absconding while they were questioning me. 2 more days ticked by and I couldn't tell if the marker for Ska and Fiona was moving anymore. Moving farther south would give me a more accurate reading, so I flew the fortress a few hours further south. I got confirmation that the line wasn't moving. It had been 2 days since I repositioned and there was no movement. All I knew is that they were still alive. I paced around the room, trying to think of something to do to help them. It was obvious that something was holding them up, but I had no idea what it could be. They should have made it to midpoint. The only 2 things I could think of is that they were hiding in the city or being prevented from leaving. That shot my entire plan out the window. Ska heaved in exhaustion. The evil men had hounded their path the entire way. If it wasn't for the infernal creatures of the dark, Ska could have lost them. But he had been forced to fight on more than one occasion as the creatures attacked. He still sported a bloody gash from when the men caught up with Fiona and him. He had barely escaped that encounter, thanks to the training Paul and Martin had given him. But the men were experts in death and they didn't relent. Ska wasn't concerned about the wound, it was healing slowly. He would have used a healing potion, but his last one went to Paul. The problem came with the obvious trail and the blood that attracted more monsters. Ska was an experienced hunter though, and it wasn't his first time being injured by something tracking him. He used the blood to his advantage and led the men on a merry chase through one of the large caverns. Once he was satisfied that he got the attention of the denizens of the dark, he bandaged the wound to prevent any more blood from giving away his position. Fiona followed him in silence. He was glad she was here. He could feel the animalistic part of his brain scream at him to stake his claim and push out all other challengers. This wasn't a new sensation for him. It was always lurking in the back of the Grimalkins' minds. It only grew louder when he was alone. The trick was not to remain alone for too long or the primal urges would take over. Fiona's presence slowed the change, but it wasn't enough to prevent it. He had time though. He heard yells in the distance and he growled in pleasure. The men had fallen into the trap. He hoped the monsters were enough to kill them, but he doubted it. At best it would buy them a few hours. There were only so many paths in the tunnel and even fewer led toward midpoint. Ska chose to remain on the main path and pushed himself as fast as possible to gain some time. He was forced to rest in an alcove for an hour. He was burned out from running and his breath was coming in ragged gasps. "How are you holding up?" Fiona asked, worry in her eyes. "I will live," he forced out through deep gulps of air. "I can slow them down for you," Fiona offered. "No, don't leave me alone. I won't make it otherwise. This place is sapping my mind much faster than if I was above ground." "Okay," she said hesitantly, "I will remain with you." "Is Paul?" "He still lives," she replied quietly. He nodded, a feral grin appearing on his face. Now that he had saved Paul, they were equals. Not that Paul didn't already treat his as such, but it was an important distinction for a Grimalkin. 10 minutes later they were back on the move. Not because he wanted to, but because a falling rock had echoed up the tunnel, alerting him that someone or something had stumbled across the pebbles he had strewn about. He could only move at a slow jog, conserving his energy. All was not smooth sailing. Ska was forced to bypass the first fortress. It was under attack by creatures. This was a normal occurrence for the forts, but he couldn't afford to wait for the battle to end. Even if he did, resting here was not an option. If the men following them caught up, they could lay a trap ahead. He kept moving, pushing through to another exterior path. Cold winds buffeted the ridge he came out to. The area was blanketed with snow and ice, even more than when they had come this way less than a week ago. That didn't stop him. Ska leapt down the mountain, avoiding the road altogether. He was uncomfortable in the cold, but it wasn't enough to stop him. An angry tundra goat bellowed in rage as Ska flew by, chasing him down the mountain. Ska was fine with that. He needed food and water as his stock had run out. Blood would have to substitute. As soon as Ska landed at the base of the ridge, he activated redirect motion, leap, violent slash, debilitating strike, and double strike all at the same time. His motion flipped 180 and he caught the goat by surprise. His attack tore off the front leg and left a long row of bleeding gashes as the beast toppled over. He rushed back and sank his teeth into the monster, savoring the warm blood as it pumped from the terrified creature's heart. The goat was only level 7 and Ska ignored its attempts to get up until his thirst was slaked. He swiped across the bleeding creature's throat, finally ending its life. He tore into the creature, not sparing the time to properly dress or clean the kill. He ripped off the legs, storing them in the ring he had. The rest he left to hopefully draw scavengers or other dangerous creatures to the area. It would hopefully slow the men down again. "Ska, look out!" Ska twisted to the side as a blade blurred through the space his head had occupied a few seconds ago. Ska raked his claws across the man's arm as he pulled back, eliciting a grunt of pain. They had caught up with them, but how? Ska could only see one of the men, a haze of some ability surrounding him. The two circled each other, while Fiona looked for the second man. Ska sensed something off. There was no scent, not even from the blood the man should be soaking the ground with. He growled in annoyance. "You are a false projection," he spat. The man didn't answer, instead, going for a thrust with his sword. Ska could easily dodge the strike and rolled to the side of the figure. When it turned to face him, Ska threw a handful of sand at the man, causing it to flinch involuntarily. That was all the opening Ska needed. Leap and double strike carried him past the man as it faded into dust. His sensitive hearing caught a scream of pain from the top of the cliff though. He spotted both men at the exit of the tunnel, looking towards him and Fiona. He decided to take a page out of Paul's playbook and gave the men the finger before bounding off across the valley floor to the next entrance. There were no more false projections as Ska made it to the next tunnel. He figured there had to be some limitation on the skill or the man would have used it earlier. He figured it was a line of sight ability. With his shortcut down the mountain, Ska would have a good half day on the men. The trail down the mountain was slippery and treacherous, even with his stats. Even if the men somehow found a way down quicker, Ska knew they couldn't match his speed. If they could, they would have caught up already. Ska had only done so out of desperation. He knew the men were strong but not their level. He could have gotten an identify skill as it didn't take up one of his precious skill slots, but he decided against it. He reasoned that if he knew his enemy was stronger, that might lead him to hesitate in battle. That was weakness, and he vowed to not let weakness rule him. If he died, then so be it, it meant his adversary was more skilled than he was. The two made it to midpoint after another 2 days. They only encountered minor creatures, this close to the city. Unfortunately, Ska knew they wouldn't be able to leave the city. He was exhausted from 4.5 days of running and fighting. He couldn't go another week without rest. Resting inside the city would be safe, but leaving the city would end badly once the men caught up, and he knew they would. Ska and Fiona could only hope that Paul was able to recover from his injuries or gather friends to help and come for them. Until that time came, they would wait within the city. They made it to the city. What do we do about it? Go in after them. They can't evade us forever. The injured man nodded, his wounds mostly healed by now. Using his soul construct was dangerous, but he had almost gotten the kill. If it wasn't for that damn ghost. Still, they knew how to handle her. The two men walked down the trail towards the town. The gate was open as people came and went. The immediate area around the town and the large cavern it sat in held many farming plots and animals. Patrols of the filthy mole people were everywhere, making sure no monster attacks occurred, but they didn't range past the cavern. They could set a trap ahead for the two, but he was sick of chasing them around and waiting to strike. Instead, they would cause chaos within the city and flush them out. Chapter 114, Action. The needle didn't move for days and I got a sinking feeling that something was wrong. I flew the fortress back to the first valley and secured it. Then I ran toward the village. I didn't enter right away, electing instead to wait until it got dark. Then I flew over the walls, setting myself down inside the city. I donned the cloak and hood, looking like the shadiest fuck you could imagine. I decided against the hood, remembering a book I had read once about penetration testing. Act as you belong. I understood the social engineering aspect of it, but I had never been good at the physical portion. I strode down the street instead of acting like a criminal and skulking about. It seemed to work. Nobody gave me so much as a second glance. I think a lot of it had to do with me looking like a beggar. My appearance was haggard from the worry and recovery. As I neared the plaza by the cave entrance, I had to slide into the shadows of an alley. Not that I was any good at hiding. Earthen barriers had been set up facing the tunnel entrance. 24 heavily armed soldiers kept their eyes on the dark tunnel. The space between, illuminated by magic. I let out a soft curse. There was no way I was getting past those people. Mr. Fuller, a sharp woman's voice spoke from behind me. I'm not afraid to admit that I jumped. How the woman had snuck up behind me, in a blind alley, I didn't know. You left before we could finish our conversation, Miss Farley said, as I turned around. I noted that she wasn't alone as I activated my all-seeing eye. There were 6 dark-robed men hiding in the shadows behind her. A glance over my shoulder showed 3 more. I was well and truly surrounded. I kicked myself mentally for returning to the city unprepared. My worry over my friends clouded my judgment. If she had meant me harm, it was a good chance I would have died. Yeah, sorry about that, I replied, trying to sound laid back. She said nothing, but I saw a slight raise to her eyebrow. Let us find some place more comfortable to chat, shall we? I didn't think her invitation was optional. And while I was confident that I could take these men on, even with my disability, I didn't want to risk bringing the town guard down on my head. She brushed past me without waiting for my response. I grit my teeth in frustration and followed her, keeping my eyes on her shadows. We arrived at a house I recognized, it was the same one I had escaped from. She motioned for me to sit in a comfortable-looking chair across from her. The furniture was all quality and wouldn't be out of place in some upscale English-style residence. I noted the others had left us alone as she closed the sliding door. The room was some sort of parlor, I think they called it. The fine wood accents and stained glass were really out of place for this town. So, Mr. Fuller. Let me stop you there, just call me Paul. I never liked being called Mr. Very well, Paul. I must say, your news came as quite a shock to the Council of West Exit. Even more so your escape. Some wanted you brought in for collusion but calmer heads prevailed. That had more to do with the fact that your information proved truthful. Less than 10 minutes after your escape a message arrived. As you can assume, it covered the events of what happened but not who caused it or why. I wasn't surprised that they had message tokens. It made sense considering the bazaar had a building near East Exit. So, why bother to question me more? While the information you provided was helpful, my bosses are angry. They want revenge against the force that attacked. Paul, let me tell you, do not anger the Mohe, they may seem calm and peaceful but they are one slight away from tearing a person apart with their claws. The attack was a slight on them and eroded trust in the tunnel and the cities. We have already gotten word that the forces of East Exit and Midpoint are mobilizing. Is that why you are guarding the tunnel? She shook her head. No, they are to prevent the Dogon from breaking out. While my spies have indicated at least 2 of these black dragons have entered after your friends, the leader and the rest of his men have fled. This information got me to sit up. Do you know where my friend are now? They arrived at Midpoint a few days ago along with the 2 black dragon pursuers. You need not worry, those men will be dealt with before they can cause any more trouble. I heaved a sigh of relief. Then why are you telling me all this? She sat back in her chair and crossed her legs. You may not have been aware but we track everyone that enters our town above a certain level. To make sure they don't cause trouble, I replied. That is one of the reasons. The other is to try and recruit strong individuals or forge alliances. One cannot stand on their own in this new world, Paul, one needs friends. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. You want me to help with the Dogon issue? Yes, she replied without preamble. I hate to break it to you, but I lost my main hand fighting the black dragon and it's not growing back. We are aware of your condition. But I see you have already come up with a workable alternative, she said, looking at my metal claw. You are a man of decisive action and unknown abilities. I think it's safe to say you are still a formidable warrior, otherwise, you wouldn't be level 19. I'm sorry, I can. Before you finish that sentence, Paul. If you help us with our little problem, we will guarantee the safe passage of your friends from Midpoint. I clenched my hands tight, causing my metal hand to clack loudly. And if I don't? The tunnels are dangerous, Mr. Fuller, anything could happen to a beastkin and a ghost within the dark. Is that a threat? I growled. No, Mr. Fuller, just a fact of life. Now, I'm going to need your answer, she replied coldly. This woman knew more than she was letting on, I had no doubt she knew about the fortress. It wasn't like it was inconspicuous, sitting uncloaked. She didn't appear to be afraid of my skills or level, but resorting to veiled threats to compel my assistance said otherwise. Did I really have a choice though? If she knew about Fiona and Ska, that meant she or her people were confident that they could deal with them. Fine, I'll help but I need a decent crafter to upgrade this hand, I said, waving my crudely crafted hand, this thing is barely serviceable. She nodded, very well, one of my men will take you to our best crafter. You will need to cover the cost of materials though. And you need to be ready before noon tomorrow. As long as your crafter is competent, it shouldn't take more than an hour. I followed another man out. I wasn't happy about the situation but if I got something out of this deal and the safe return of Ska and Fiona it was worth it. I could only take their word that the two were safe in midpoint. I knew they were at least alive, according to my tracker. As for my hand, I really only needed one thing, a way to rotate the fingers. As it was now, they were stationary, which reduced my combat effectiveness quite a bit. Adding rotation would restore me to 75%. I would never be back to 100% unless I found a way to restore my original hand. I stopped as the man pounded on the door to the building. It didn't look like a blacksmith, there was no furnace as with the ones I had seen in the bazaar. I heard a man yelling from inside, "I'm coming. This better be damn good," waking me up in the middle of the night. I heard a thunk as the lock was released and the door scooched open. "Miss Farley requests your services for a few hours, please assist this man with his request. She will cover your time but he must cover any material costs." The grumpy man from beyond the door yelled, and this couldn't have waited for morning. "Afraid not. Fine. Get in here so I can get this done and go back to bed. Tell your boss, this little stunt will cost her triple my normal price." The man simply nodded as we followed him inside. I finally got a good look at the man. He was skinny to the point of ribs poking out through his skin. I used Identify on him. Borla's Metal Mancer level 15. That might explain the lack of blacksmithing tools, I thought. The man walked around behind a workbench. "So what is so damn important that you need to wake me up?" he groused, looking directly at me. I showed him my prosthetic. "I need to have the claws rotate. Show me the current functions." I manipulated the fingers but didn't activate the cannon. "I would save that." Fascinating. I don't feel any enchantments but I can tell there is magic powering the device." He grabbed my arm and yanked it forward with surprising strength. He examined the fingers closely. His eyes roving over the runes and the mana heart. He didn't say anything but I saw him quirk an eyebrow. I hadn't been able to hide certain runes as it impacted the design. Mostly the containment runes. I felt a pulse of magic and the next thing I knew all of the fingers had come off and were floating in the air. I tried to jerk back in surprise but some sort of field held my arm as the man mumbled to himself. He turned around and dug through a bin of material. I saw him produce 2 discs of stellium along with some mithril. He tossed them into the air and they hung there, reforming. He turned back towards me, "Do you have your weapon with you?" I produced my staff and he looked it over from a distance. I saw the inside of my fingers reforming to curve slightly, allowing for a better grip on the staff. Next, the disc of metal slammed down, fusing with the base. I winced in pain from the impact. The man smiled, a little bit of revenge for waking him up I assumed. I could see the 3 metals had merged into one disc with the mithril sandwiched in the center. Next, my old base along with the mana heart connected, much softer this time. This was followed quickly after by the fingers. "Are we nearly done?" the man who brought me here asked. "It is almost morning." I had to blink. Somehow I had lost track of time. "Nearly there," Borlas grunted. The last finger attached itself and I felt the magic release its hold on my arm. Borlas slumped back exhausted. There is a lot of magic in those little pieces, it took time for my skills to work around it all without disrupting whatever it is the magic does. "I would be interested to learn about that," he stated. I grunted noncommittally, "Perhaps if I live through the week, I may tell you about it." He smiled, "Fair enough, well, test it out." I looked at the hand, it didn't look much different, other than the additional metal that was now fused to the base and the half moons in the fingers, allowing me to grip the staff. But I thought about twisting the hand. It rotated effortlessly and I had to gape in astonishment. There was no need for mechanical connections when you had magic. The hand could rotate around 360 degrees and it wasn't slow. I sped it up until the fingers were a deadly blur of metal. The other 2 men took a step back, just in case. The fingers stopped as fast as they started. I took out my staff, grabbing it with the metal hand. Giving it a spin. I learned quickly that if I didn't have the staff held at exactly the right spot it would wobble my whole arm. I had to give up on the idea of turning my staff into a deadly blender. I could spin it faster than my old hand though, so there was no issue there. I nodded in thanks and paid the man a ridiculous amount of coin for his work. For the 6,000 credits I could have hired a master smith to craft me an enchanted hand that had full functionality. The man winked and whispered in my ear, "The additional charge is to keep that fabulous weapon a secret." I needed to collect my friends and get out of this damn town before they got any other funny ideas. Chapter 115, Endless Enemies. I had to run to keep up with my chaperone. I could already hear the sounds of fighting coming from the tunnel entrance in the distance. We came into view of the tunnel and just a mass of monsters billowing out. It wasn't even the Dogon, it was everything else trying to flee from the creatures. Thankfully most seemed to be stunned by the bright light of the sun and were picked off by magic and ranged attacks before they could clear the blockade. If it was this bad here, I couldn't imagine how bad it was at the fortresses. I had to give the defenders credit, they were holding their own against the masses of creatures. I cursed the fact that I hadn't been more diligent in figuring out my body tattoos. One use of my aura of rage and I could wipe these creatures out in minutes. If I used the skill now in my still weakened condition, I don't think my body could take it. That didn't mean I was defenseless though. I cast my buffs, giving the defenders within range a little boost, then I got to work. My wings and blink step took me to the center of the square, where I hovered out of reach of the creatures below. Fire and lightning danced across my staff as I imbued it. Then I utilized my new hand to rotate the staff, casting Eye of the Storm. Cracks of lightning speared down, frying dozens as a pillar of fire rose into the sky, sucking all the moisture out of the air. The air current was quite a bit more powerful than before. I had to assume it had something to do with the speed I could spin the staff. Creatures from outside the circle were drawn into it and tossed into the maelstrom of fire. I kept the spell going for 18 seconds. Even after I had to land when my wings ended. When the spell ended there was a moment of silence as everyone stared at me. The spell was flashy but it didn't really do much damage. But for groups of enemies like this, it worked quite well. I counted over 100 kill notifications. This wasn't even close to leveling me up though, and the silence soon ended as more creatures boiled up from the cave. I chugged one of my backup mana potions, then stomped on the ground, toward the cave entrance. Disruption cracked and broke the ground, causing lightning and fire to shoot up between the cracks as spears of rock impaled a dozen more creatures. Even with this, I was being forced back by the creatures. I was forced to activate the enchantment on my staff as a few creatures tried attacking me from the side. My clumsy movement almost made me miss the first one. Thankfully, my staff clipped it, causing it to collapse in agony. The battle went on for another 10 minutes and I was forced to retreat a few times to recover mana. With the break in the battle, the defenders were able to increase their attacks on the monsters attacking the barriers. This freed them up and they were able to assist me in fighting off the remainder of the enemy wave. I sat on a crate, getting my breath back. The fight wasn't over and we could already hear more creatures coming up the tunnel. At one point I spotted Miss Farley. She was in the thick of it, bashing creatures' heads in with a maul. Each blow would send golden sparks flying out, which would set other enemies ablaze. I was hardly the only person wielding magic in this fight. I spotted 3 wizards that somehow formed a massive ball of acid that they rolled into oncoming enemies, completely dissolving them. I shuddered at the thought. There was another that was shooting lightning bolts from his hands and screaming ultimate power. At this point, I kind of wondered if magic and insanity were interlinked a bit. There were far more people attacking the creatures than there were at the beginning of the fight. Everyone wanted the free, almost safe experience, and who could blame them? The only problem was this unruly mass of people was starting to get in the way of the actual defenders. I heard a scream off to the side as one man was snapped in half by what appeared to be a massive beetle. That caused a panic and the defensive force was shoved aside as frightened people fled. This only caused more monsters to get past the barricades. 10 more people were killed before the defenders were able to restore order and contain the breach. I could only shake my head in disgust and hope these people learned from their mistakes. Getting stronger was a noble goal, but doing so at the expense of common sense wouldn't get them far. Then again, didn't I do the same thing? At least when I did it, only I was in danger if something went wrong. The fighting ended 4 hours later. The Dogon had finally shown up around the 3-hour mark. They had no goal other than to pour from the tunnel and look for a new home. This made them easy enough to fight, but they were still dangerous. My armor had over a dozen new scratches on it from a few scrapes I wasn't able to get out of quick enough. My healing kept me on my feet though, and I made it out alive. It was more than I can say for some of the defenders. I was leaning against a wall and resting when Miss Farley found me. "Thank you for your assistance with this matter. It would not have been a certain outcome had you not agreed to help." "You say that as if I had a choice." "We always have a choice, Mr. Fuller. Some are not quite as black and white as we would like though." I watched her as she walked away. If it wasn't for the fact that she used my friends to coerce me into this fight, she might have been attractive, not that I had any interest. She had a goth librarian vibe going on. All she needed was horn-rimmed glasses to finish off the look. I let thoughts of the woman drop from my mind as I glanced at my experience bar. Even with all the fighting, my level hadn't gone up. The monsters were just too low of a level to get me over that hump. I was around 70% of the way there. I scanned my surroundings with my tattoo and noticed nobody was actively watching me. There were a few spies hidden about though. Using this opportunity, I slipped into the crowd of people doing cleanup. My goal was to reach the fort called Edge of Darkness. I didn't feel like relying on the generosity of Miss Farley to see my friends home safe. Hopefully, they could make their way there. Once we were reunited we could clear the remaining creatures blocking the dungeon. We all needed to be stronger. You're sure they followed us into the city? Ska growled. Yes, there is no mistaking their faces. They know we can't outrun them anymore, so they came to finish the job while we are trapped inside the walls. Can we take them? I'm not sure, Fiona replied uncertainly. Ska quietly growled. What do we do then? Try to remain as public as possible. If they do attack us we can get the guards on our side. My instincts are screaming for me to rip them apart here and now, but I will restrain myself. What of Paul? You said he felt closer. It's hard to tell, I can sense a general direction and it feels like he is heading straight toward us. That is good, then we only need to hold out until he arrives. I don't think those two men will wait that long, Fiona sighed. A milky white silhouette watched two figures talking from a roof. It couldn't hear what the two were saying but that wasn't the construct's purpose. I located our quarry. Good, let's go shake things up, then go deal with them. The other man nodded as the two walked farther into town. They ducked down an alley and two cloaked men followed them. There was a brief scuffle before all went quiet again. You think those were the only two tails? Unlikely, but it's safe to say the local powers know of our presence. Go to Plan B. The bandaged man nodded, pulling a brick of C4 from his ring and shoving it into a crack in the building's wall. The two split up, placing more explosives around the city. There was no longer any time for subtlety. The bandaged man was placing his fifth charge when the alley was blocked off from both ends. He glanced at the four people, just as they rushed his position. There was no escaping his fate. He pulled out the detonator from his ring and yelled, "For the glory of the Black Dragon," then he clicked the detonator. His fellow Black Dragon member heard and saw the explosions, cursing softly. He had placed 6 of his own explosives, which he now detonated as well. There were screams, people running, and some flames. But most of the buildings were made from rock. Still, they made good shrapnel. He pulled out his massive warhammer and swung it at anyone that got within range as he ran to get to his quarry. The tracking spell his accomplice cast would last for only so long. Ska was sent sprawling to the ground by a nearby explosion. Some debris peppered him but his armor absorbed the brunt of the attack. He got up just in time to see a man barreling toward him with a massive hammer. He managed to roll and jump out of range as the weapon smashed down, cratering the hard stone street and an area around it. Fiona tried to stab the man in the back but he had been ready for her attack. He twisted to the side and struck at her with the butt of his weapon. She was forced to phase out to avoid the blow and the man took the opportunity to leap at Ska. Ska, not one to back down, accepted the challenge and sprang towards the man. The man smiled evilly and Ska flew through the false image, right into the swing of the massive hammer. He was sent flying into a building as his defensive item activated. Ska was in great pain as he extricated himself from the wall. He needed to get back into the fight as Fiona was barely holding off the man. He pulled a potion of true sight from his ring and chugged it. Martin and Paul had urged him to purchase something like it since he had refused to get the eye tattoo. The man bellowed and a red aura appeared around him. Ska could tell he had gotten faster and stronger as Fiona was now forced to stay almost completely incorporeal. The man blurred and Ska leaped to the side, avoiding another blow of the powerful weapon. Before the man could recover, Ska used redirect motion to activate violent slash and double strike as he blurred behind the man. He managed to land the hits, but it cost him as the man punched him away with an armored fist. All the health he had just healed had been knocked away by that one blow and the man was already coming at him again. Ska backpedaled, avoiding the man's swings until he ran up against a building. Fiona pulled the man's attention trying another sneak attack but her strike was blocked and the man was fast enough to retaliate before she could phase out again. Ska didn't waste this opportunity, he leaped off the wall, going between the man's legs and raking both with debilitating strike. The man ignored his injury and Ska felt the hammer smash against his spine, crushing him to the ground just before the man fell over. Ska was dazed and couldn't move. "Fucking Outworlder, have a gift from Uncle Sam." Ska was able to turn his head in time to see the man pull something out of a storage ring that looked like clay. He pulled out another item as Fiona stabbed him through the head. The body jerked as he dropped the items, before falling over dead. "Are you okay?" "I will live," Ska groaned. "I just need time to heal." Ska knew it would take a day at least to heal his broken spine. Thankfully the armor took most of the blow or his organs would have been destroyed by that last hit. A dozen people came running up to them. Fiona could see through their low-level stealth and Ska still had the effect of his potion. "Here, drink this," one man said. Ska hissed at him, making the man flinch back. "We are here to keep you safe. Your friend Paul made a deal with our boss." Ska looked toward Fiona, who still held her sword at the ready, and watched the men. She just nodded. Ska grabbed the healing potion, his arm still working, and downed it. He could feel the healing magic work its way to his injured spine. It would fuse the break but he would still need a few hours to recover completely. "As soon as you can walk, please follow us." Seeing as they were outnumbered and they were both injured, he did as directed, keeping an eye on these cloaked men and women. They led the two of them to a walled-off house. "Please make use of this domicile until you heal. Then we will escort you to your friend." Chapter 116, Converging in the Dark. I huffed out a tired breath, angrily kicking the dead monster in front of me. The armored carapace blunting my foot as much as it had my damn staff attacks. I had been forced to use the cannon to kill the creature, which pissed me off. The stupid monster was only level 8 but my limited mobility had hampered my usual fighting style and prevented me from cracking it open through sheer might. Even my elemental powers had been useless. The creature's tough stone armor radiated heat making lava attacks useless, my main go-to for dealing with heavily armored foes. But the pure magic of my cannon speared through the creature like a hot knife through butter as well as the stone behind the creature. The resulting damage had left a haze of smoke and rock in the air and left my ears ringing. I made a mental note to add some sort of power selector to the cannon. This was overkill for most things. For now, I only charged the gem up 20%. I looted the creature and got back to jogging down the tunnel. I still had 3 days to go until I reached the fortress. "You lost him?" Miss Farley said in annoyance. "Apologies ma'am," he slipped away while we were distracted by the aftermath of the battle. "Any reports from the guards at the wall or the ones watching his flying device?" "No, ma'am. He did not leave the city as far as we are aware. And the people at the landing site have not been able to gain entrance to the vehicle." Annabelle Farley tapped her hand on the table. It was risky to try and gain entry to the obviously magical construct but it couldn't be helped. The council demanded to know what it was and what it was capable of. The fact that she didn't know disturbed her and was part of the reason she didn't push against attempts to gain entry, not that she had much say in the matter. If it came down to it, the Mohe would use their earth magic to get inside. As for the man himself, she had no doubt where he had gone. The fact that he so easily slipped away was annoying and gave her another black mark in the eyes of the council. If she kept screwing up to this degree, she might as well flee the town. The council didn't suffer fools long. "It's obvious Mr. Fuller has gone into the tunnel to retrieve his friends. It appears he doesn't put much faith in our abilities or our promise to keep them safe. Send word to Midpoint and see if they can speed up their reunion. We don't need someone of Mr. Fuller's capabilities or influence on our bad side. And if our other agents encounter him, observe at a distance, do not engage or follow out of the safe zones." "I will see to it right away," the man responded, giving a respectful bow before he turned and left the room. Annabelle deflated after the man left the room. Wrangling all these Type A personalities was worse than her previous job as an executive assistant. At least back then the men were only power-hungry and demanding. Now the men were power-hungry, powerful, and demanding. If she stepped wrong around these juggernauts, they would squash her beneath their ambitions and not even realize nor care. She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a small locked box. She popped it open and a tinkling of music started to play as the tiny ballerina started to twirl. She pulled the dancing figure out and slid the peg of the leg into an imperceptible hole in the side of the box. A small tray popped open, revealing a small token. Early on in the city's establishment, she had gotten Borlas to make her this teleportation token in a portable array. It had cost her her dignity, but that wasn't the first time she had paid using her body. She had hidden the target array in the basement of an abandoned house, somewhere to the west. Until now she had felt it safer in this box than on her person, in case the council wanted to search her storage items. Which they had done on a few occasions. But now, with everything falling apart, she wanted her escape route readily available. She had a feeling this whole plan to force Mr. Fuller to work for them would blow up spectacularly. And she didn't want to be around to take the blame. I finally arrived at the fortress. I was tired, dirty, and in a real shitty mood. I was allowed entry, but there were more than a few looks of surprise at my solo entrance. I only noticed this because I was keeping my eyes open for those not surprised to see me. I spotted a few of those, noting their faces. Wandering over to a quiet spot near the wall, I checked on the tracking stone. The arrow for Ska was fluctuating. I took that to mean he was getting closer. I sighed quietly. I was prepared to push on to midpoint, but I needed rest. I could still meet them in the tunnels after I rested. I was startled awake by the sounds of the gate being opened. Even the occasional sounds of battle against the Dugon hadn't woken me. I knew they only even opened the gate for travelers coming or going. I stood up, shaking off the stiffness of sleep as a group of 12 people entered the fort. I spotted Ska immediately and felt my spirits lighten. "Someone missed us," a breathy voice whispered in my ear, followed by a breath of cold air and a chuckle. I just rolled my eyes and whispered back. "About time, I was getting bored of waiting. Let's find a quiet spot to have a chat." Ska bounded over, escaping the ring of people protecting him. The people looked over at me but didn't approach. I watched them though, as they dispersed near the far side of the fort. We walked until I was sure nobody was in earshot. Not that spells couldn't pick up what we said, but I couldn't make it any better, or could I? I held up my hand, forestalling any conversation as I pulled out a sheet of paper and my magical pen and ink. I scribbled out a simple runic obfuscation spell and fed it mana. The sounds around us faded as everything took on a slightly blurry appearance. Okay, this should keep us from being overheard for a minute or so. First, I'm glad you two are okay. We can catch up later, but right now we need to leave the fortress quietly and make our way down to that dungeon below. Is that wise? Fiona asked. Maybe not, but we need to get stronger, faster. There is no telling when the black dragon will strike at us again. And now that I can't grow my hand back, I might be more of a liability in any further encounters. Fiona gasped at that revelation and Ska growled. Yes, we need more strength, Ska stated. Fiona let out an exasperated sigh but nodded as well. Good, split up and meet me at the northern edge of this cavern. I will carve a way down. The three of us broke up as the sounds started coming back. There were some glares sent our way, but nobody had been close enough to disrupt our conversation before we finished. I glared back at a few who had come towards us, causing them to back off. It took me a little over an hour to sneak out of the fortress unnoticed. Stealth was not my strong suit, and it had taken an attack of Dugon to free me from my observers. Avoiding the critters had been easy as I simply flew high above them. When I landed at the far end of the deep scar in the earth, Fiona and Ska were already there. I hadn't even known Ska had managed to slip out yet. You're slow, Ska hissed in delight. Yeah, I grumbled. Just keep an eye out while I use my magic to carve stairs down. It took 2 hours to mold the stone into a passable staircase to the bottom, or close enough to it that we wouldn't die by falling. Going all the way down would have been an issue as the entire floor was crawling with Dugon. There are far less than when I was last here, Fiona said. I nodded. West exit had a monster tide, caused by these bastards. I estimated at least half of the creatures, if not more, attacked the tunnel exit there. You think we can take this many? Normally, no, but I learned a few things during the hours of fighting. And we only need to get to the dungeon. Come on, we don't have much time before those idiots in the fortress realize we're gone. I jumped down, my staff imbued with ice and water. I killed the closest bugs with my staff, then whipped out stunning gusts of freezing water. The insects that weren't hit skittered away from the zones of cold. It was much easier to control the insects down here than the ones that had mindlessly attacked the town. I figured it had something to do with that nesting drive, seeing as these weren't all that aggressive, yet. Ska dropped down beside me, flexing his claws. Stick close or they will overwhelm you quickly. He nodded, kicking away one of the more curious bugs. My ability to keep them away wasn't perfect, and a few still made their way through the warmer areas. I wasn't too worried about a swarm. They seemed to be slowing down going by the time I had spent in the fortress. I figured we had another 40 minutes to clear a path to the dungeon before the next swarm started. Being caught down here during that would not be good. Knowing that, I left larger gaps between the cold spots. I alternated between shockwave and stunning gust. Shockwave wasn't as effective, it scattered the cold as it impacted, leaving a larger area of cold, but it didn't last very long. We slowly crept toward the location that Fiona pointed out. The northern end of the cavern above had been the closest we could get to the dungeon from above. It was tucked away below an outcropping of rock that ran for hundreds of meters. We got about 2/3 of the way to the dungeon when I realized we weren't going to make it in time. There was no going back either, we would have to lay a fresh trail to block the monsters. Ska hissed in agitation and I turned to look. The insects had all stopped moving, all except their antennae. Those were flicking back and forth in agitation. Shit, run for the dungeon. Ska didn't have to be told twice as he sprinted across and through the bugs. They made no move to stop him as he smashed them aside. I ran behind watching the antennae flick faster and faster. Then those stopped as well. There was no pause or hesitation as the bugs swarmed toward the three of us. Ska, keep going, I yelled, smashing bugs away as I took to the air. I had to kick a few clingers off me as I flapped frantically toward Ska. He hadn't been able to make it to the entrance and was furiously fighting off the bugs. I landed behind him. Stay close, I'm going to use Eye of the Storm. He nodded, ducking his head as my mechanical hand made the staff blur above my head. At first, the storm was a whiteout blizzard, but that soon changed into deadly projectile ice that killed anything that got close. I exhaled and my breath came out as white vapor, telling me the temperature had dropped below freezing in the surrounding area. I cancelled the spell and slammed the end of my staff down toward the dungeon, activating disruption. A wave of rock and freezing ice shot up, scattering the bugs in our path. Go, now! Skaran and Fiona and I were right behind him. We passed through a dark opening and I got a message. You have entered the Swarm Tunnels, Level 13 Dungeon. Recommended team size 4 people of level 16 or higher. I breathed out in relief. While we weren't safe, it was far better to be in here than outside surrounded by the Dogon. Or that's what I hoped. I could already hear the click of legs and the buzz as the first wave approached us. 5 human-sized Dogon with side-like appendages stomped up the tunnel with another 15 of the smaller Dogon. That's when I recalled the man at the fort saying they had only been fighting drones this whole time. I hit Ska with a healing touch and got to work. We weren't leaving this dungeon without a full set of attributes. And this time I had prepared. Chapter 117, The Spoils. Ska and I finished off the last broodmother, seconds after Fiona dealt with hers. Our dungeon dive lasted 4 full days. I was thankful for the portable shield and my arm cannon. Both had come in handy in the tight tunnels. The shield to block the bugs so we could rest and recuperate, and my arm cannon because it could clear an entire tunnel with one blast. When we finally reached the spawning chamber, we found not 1 but 10 of the gargantuan egg layers. They weren't much of a threat, but the elite guard Dogon were a pain to deal with. They refused to be drawn into the tighter tunnels and had the same scythe-like appendages of the normal soldiers. But they also had sonic attacks. Fiona was our best asset in dealing with those creatures. Once she got them down to a manageable level, we went in and finished off the rest. They were still only level 15, not much of a threat to any of us, just annoying. I plopped down to rest. We had time until the dungeon disappeared and I was tired. I also wanted to go over the messages that had come through. No level up, but I was getting very close. Congratulations, you are the first group to clear this dungeon. For this epic feat, you have been awarded 1 free skill slot. For being the first group to clear this dungeon, your team has been awarded 5,000 credits. Your team has earned the title Bane of Arthropods, 15% additional damage when fighting hard-shelled insects. Additional rewards are being calculated based on waves you survived before clearing the dungeon. Calculating. Your team survived 502 waves. For surviving more than 50 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the lowest level individual. For surviving more than 100 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 150 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 200 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 250 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 300 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 350 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 400 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 450 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. For surviving more than 500 waves in this horde dungeon, your team receives 1 stat point allocated to the next person in the party. Congratulations, you are the first group on your planet to survive a full 500 waves in a horde dungeon. For this epic feat, you have been awarded the title for the horde. For the horde, for every enemy arrayed against you over 5, you receive 1% damage reduction to a maximum of 50%. And an intuitive sense for horde dungeons if they are within 1 mile of your location. The full 10 points, 5 each. But I was almost happier about getting the second title. For the horde was amazing. Not only did it make us harder to kill when we fought larger groups, all 3 of us could now detect other horde dungeons. It was a shame Fiona wasn't eligible for the stat points, but at least she still got the titles. I assigned my 5 points and looked at my new stats. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter level 19. Strength, 15, plus 2, modifier x20. Endurance, 20 modifier x38. Agility, 16, plus 2, modifier x20. Perception, 17 modifier x20. Intelligence, 22 modifier x38. Wisdom, 15 modifier x20. Charisma, 11 modifier x20. Luck, 14 modifier x20. HP, 760, 836. Mana, 836. Mana Rigon, M300. I had tried to put more points in endurance, figuring that surviving 500 rounds in a swarm dungeon would count as a feat of endurance, but apparently it didn't start counting feats until you were already at the threshold of 20. I was a bit annoyed but not surprised. It just confirmed what I had learned with the intelligence stat. Ska is happy, Fiona said, as she floated up to me. Yet, not often that he gets free skill slots and more attribute points. Seeing as I have your attention, can I run something by you? What do you mean by that? Oh, gee, I don't know. You have been rather preoccupied the last few months. Not that I blame you. I know how hard being imprisoned against your will can be. Then Martin left and, well. Sorry, I didn't mean to be distant, she replied apologetically. As I said, I understand. What did you want to run by me anyway? My next class, I added. Oh, are you closing in on level 20? Yes, I figure if we clear a few hundred of the Dugon from the chasm I should level up. Honestly, I'm not sure how much help I am going to be. I don't know anyone personally that has hit level 20. In my old world, it was rare, and mainly only royalty attained that goal. The opportunities to level as fast as you have, were non-existent. But feel free to bounce ideas off of me and I'll do my best. I nodded. Originally I wanted to choose a class that gave me the ability to create portals, and use that to get back at the people that wronged me. But now that seems redundant with the Flying Fortress. Fiona asked. Exactly, it would still be a powerful ability, but it seems useless in my fight against Randy Cotton and the Black Dragon, especially now that my hand is gone. I don't know much about teleportation-based classes, but what I do know makes them seem like more of a support or utility-style class. Like a pure healer. There may be battle-oriented ones, but I would expect those to be advanced classes that you would probably not meet the prerequisites for. Fair enough. I could always choose a mage or pure attack class, but I don't feel like those would be flexible enough to meet my changing needs going forward, I replied with a shrug. You may be correct, plus you would have to either learn a new fighting style and weapon or choose one that utilizes the staff or mace as you have with your first class. Some strong classes utilize that weapon, but I can't say how well the skills would meld with your own. It would be a waste to have two skills like your blink step, for instance. Monk might be a good fit, but they use body enhancement key abilities, which again seem redundant with your buffs. I wonder if those abilities would stack with my own. Double strength enhancement would be nice. I doubt they would. Most enhancements like that wash out the weaker one, leaving only the stronger version in place, she stated. I mulled this over as we watched Ska jump around the room acclimating himself to his new stats. He hadn't hit level 19 yet, and I would probably hit level 20 before he leveled up. I had one other idea, I said hesitantly. Oh, she inquired. I was thinking about taking a class that lets me steal other people's abilities. I see. I haven't met anyone with a skill set or class like that. But with the system, there is always the possibility that more than one class like that exists. Classes are always balanced in some way. Take yours for example. Your spells, while powerful require you to speak or at least mouth the incantation for them to work. Yet, I learned about just how vulnerable that made me when Randy busted my jaw so I couldn't cast. The best advice I can give you is to read over the class information carefully. It will usually tell you of any downsides in advance. Wait, what? The system was vague at best when I chose my first class. Didn't you say the Black Dragon tampered with the system before it went live? Well, someone sure did. But won't that affect it going forward? I asked. Unlikely, while they may have tampered with the nodes near where you started, it would be impossible for them to do that to all of the nodes on a planet, let alone the multiverse. The system is resilient and redundant. There have been stories of older civilizations trying to destroy the system to return to a pre-system state, but none have ever been able to accomplish that goal. Though, I can't imagine why anyone would want to go back. Most people enjoy longer, healthier lives with the system in place, she stated. Then why did they even bother trying in the first place? Fiona shrugged, hard to say. Perhaps it was a mistake, or two groups were fighting over a node and damaged it. I would imagine the activation phase was the only time when the system was vulnerable at all. Perhaps one group tried to stop it without knowing all the details. That made a horrible amount of sense. I had a good guess on who was fighting whom as well. I rubbed my temple. I think the Black Dragon and the Sons of Autumn were responsible for this whole mess. Those religious zealots you mentioned. I nodded. It would explain the blood feud the two groups seemed to have against one another so soon after the system came into being. Not that the Sons of Autumn needed a reason to be insane. While this revelation was enlightening, there was nothing I could do about it, not that I wanted to. Fiona was correct, why go back to the way things were? Sure, this world was dangerous, but it also allowed anyone the opportunity to rise to the top, irrespective of wealth or previous standing. I knew the Sons of Autumn were still around, but they had been weakened severely in their battle to claim Chicago and kill off anyone in sight. I may have to make sure they stayed that way after I dealt with the Black Dragon. I didn't want another Armin situation. It sometimes felt that I never escaped the politics in Chicago. The Black Dragon, the Sons of Autumn, and the Stygian Order were all issues that needed to be dealt with sooner rather than later. Then there were the unknowns like Lord Victi and the Mohe. So far they seemed content with their little slice of earth, but I wasn't happy with the Mohe or how they handled me. How they dealt with my friends and me when we reached the tunnel exit would determine what happened after. After resting up for a few hours, the three of us made a beeline toward the dungeon entrance. Other than the stat points and the clear bonus, there wasn't much to speak of in this dungeon. The mana hearts were small, being split amongst the 10 egg layers. And we didn't bother looting the thousands of bugs. The chitinous plates were of subpar material and I didn't feel like stuffing my rings full of them. We burst out of the dungeon and got right to work, slaughtering our way through the bugs. A great majority of them had cleared out in the 4 days that we had been down here, but there was still well over 100,000 of the critters. They also seemed quite listless, skittering away instead of attacking. That was fine with us, we were fast enough to catch the bugs and take them down. It usually only took 1 or 2 attacks. I kept an eye on my experience bar. I didn't want to level down here, I wanted a large enough buffer to level out of sight of the Mohe and their underlings. Alright, I'm nearly leveled, let's go. The three of us broke off our attack and made for the stairs. The bugs scattered at our approach, it seemed like the swarm season had finally ended. Chapter 118, Mohe Council. We climbed out of the ravine and quickly made our way to the tunnel toward west exit. We have eyes on us, Fiona said as she appeared next to me. Seeing as they already knew about Fiona, there was no reason to hide her existence here. You think they will check the ravine to see what we were up to? Yes, she answered unhesitantly. Shit, we probably should have waited for the dungeon to fully collapse before we left. Too late to change that now. Fiona nodded as the two of us ran to keep up with Ska. It was an impossible prospect as Ska put his points in agility. Ska had been able to go above the limit on agility due to a previous encounter. I hadn't even realized his agility was at 20 prior to today. I wasn't sure if I would win against him in our next duel. Not that a loss would be bad, it just meant my friend was getting stronger. We disappeared into the dark tunnel as Fiona kept us apprised of the tales we had picked up. Iron Claw stomped across the dry rocky ground as he made his way to the valley. A job that should have belonged to that stupid human woman Miss Farley. They were useful if properly motivated, but their naming sense left a lot to be desired. Why couldn't they be named as the Mohe, by their first major accomplishment? But she had vanished when word of what that damn Paul Fuller and his cohorts had done in the depths came to light. How that group had learned about a horde dungeon was unknown. Likely their ethereal friend. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the fact they cleared the dungeon without informing the Mohe of its existence. The council had immediately come together upon hearing this news. They declared the man and his team outlaws and were in the process of securing them and the magical artifact sitting outside town. Well! Iron Claw yelled as he neared the object. A man wrapped in black quickly ran over to him. Counselor, we weren't made aware you would be arriving personally. Of course not, Iron Claw spat, as if I would tell a lesser where I was going. Have you gained entry? Not as of yet, esteemed counselor. The artifact is heavily defended and we were afraid to damage the device. Useless, get out of my way and I will show you how it's done. The man bowed his head as Iron Claw strode up the ramp, his long claws glowing with magic. No metal or earth had stood in his way since he was but a boy, and today would be no different. With a downward slash, his 3 claws ripped through the metal of the door, tearing a long gash through the thick entryway. See, he roared, easy as can. There was a bright flash and the crack of thunder as everything went blank. Iron Claw woke up a minute later, sprawled on the ground dozens of feet from the object. People were yelling but his ears were ringing and he couldn't hear. Someone shoved a healing potion into his mouth and he choked it back as he pushed people away and sat up. His hearing started to return as the magic went to work. Sir, are you okay? I'm fine, what happened? A defensive spell was triggered. Iron Claw glanced at his health, seeing he was still down 300 points. It must have been one hell of a defensive enchantment to pack that much punch. Then he saw his beautiful hand. A look of abject horror crossed his face as he saw that his claws had been melted away to nothing. Unlike the other damage, the claws wouldn't regrow from the healing as it was dead tissue. It would be years before he could tunnel properly again. He roared in outrage. Get inside that structure and take it apart piece by piece. I want all of its secrets and I want them now. Send a message back to the city. Kill Paul Fuller and his companions. No mercy, he growled, getting to his feet as his orders were carried out. His eyes snapped to the doorway as one of the men turned to smoke and went inside the open rent. This was followed shortly after by a scream as a white light flashed through the damaged section. Warning, breach detected. Safeguard protocol engaged, a voice boomed from the structure before a crackling field of electricity covered the entire outside. Iron Claw knew better than to stick around, using a skill to swap himself with someone much further away. It was just in time as the field of electricity billowed out from the magical construct and killed anyone within 20 feet. 10 of the 12 people the council had here were killed by the attack. Only Iron Claw and the man he had issued orders to had survived the attack. Warning, unknown entities detected. Retribution protocol engaged. Iron Claw's eyes went wide as openings revealed themselves around the structure, revealing mana cannons. He didn't have any more time to reflect on this as all cannons fired, sending him to the land beyond. Nobody was left near the fortress to hear the next words as the cannon openings resealed themselves. Warning, owners not detected in range, initiating lockdown procedure. The force field snapped into place with those last words. With this procedure, the fortress could draw on the remaining energy of all 3 crystals to keep the field active until it was deactivated or ran out of energy. The 3 of us slowed our mad dash out of the final tunnel. Some shadowy figures still followed us from a distance but made no move to stop or hinder us. Some had even stopped following altogether as we kept a grueling pace, using endurance potions to combat the lack of sleep or rest. The few monsters we encountered died quickly and we were at the last stretch of tunnel, leading out. Be prepared, we may have to fight our way out, I said flatly. Ska and Fiona nodded. While I had helped the city defend itself, there was no telling what the mood would be after they learned about the Horde dungeon. My understanding was that they were rare, at least in other worlds, and highly fought over. As we passed the last bend, the exit became visible. I could see armed soldiers behind barricades, similar to what I had seen previously. The only difference was the 4 Mohe standing in front of the barricade. We stopped at the tunnel exit and I scanned the collected faces. I already had my weapon out as we faced off. One older female Mohe, at least I assumed she was older due to the brew on her face, stepped forward. Mr. Fuller, I am Counselor Stonebreaker, what you did was an injustice. You should have notified someone and brought the discovery to the council. Yet, you guys haven't been exactly welcoming. We are aware of our shortcomings on that matter. Perhaps we are both in the wrong here. In an effort to change that, we have come to a decision. The council has banished you and your friends from our city. Anyone that consorts with you are likewise banned from using our passage through the spine. We would appreciate it if you left our fair city in peace, Mr. Fuller. Our soldiers will follow you to make sure you and your friends don't cause any more harm. That was it. The woman returned to the others and they walked away. I was confused but decided to take the offered escape. The soldiers shadowed the three of us on either side as they led us to the exit. Some of the humans looked oddly conflicted but the Mohe captains kept them in line. What the hell happened? I asked as the gate slammed shut behind us. Ska shrugged but Fiona had something to say. She seemed deeply saddened by something. Well, whatever it is, let's get out of here before they change their mind. We quickly left the city and its residents behind, making our way to the valley where I parked the fortress. Ska was the first to sense something wrong. He paused, sniffing the air. It smells of blood and magic. Wait, you can smell magic? I asked. No, just the after effects of strong spells. It smells of a fresh thunderstorm and burnt rock. Shit. I think I know why, let's hurry. We ran through the ravine until the fortress was in sight. We had to stop as the ground around the fortress had been blasted into craters. I could also see charred bodies near the fortress where the other defensive measures had activated. What happened? Fiona gasped. The idiots tried to gain entry into the fortress, they must have triggered the failsafe and defenses. Even now I could see the sheen of the force field. You two wait here, I need to go disarm it. You should be on the acceptable member list but this is the first time the magic has been activated, better safe than sorry. They nodded as I made my way to the fortress. I didn't fly over, deciding to take it slow. There was no telling if they had damaged something in their attempt to gain entry. I stopped at the edge of one of the craters. The Mana cannons had done a terrific job of blasting everything around the fortress into rubble. Sliding down the loose stones, I made it to the bottom. I pulled out my identification slab. While not necessary, seeing as I had the tattoo, it couldn't hurt. I waited for a minute and the fortress didn't respond by blasting me to bits, so I moved forward. The climb up the ramp was probably the most nerve-wracking thing I had done in some time. I had built the defenses to be effective, but I hadn't expected them to be this effective. They even scared me. I set the tablet into an indent next to the door. Seeing the damage that had likely activated the defenses, I shook my head. My own voice spoke from a concealed speaker. Voice authentication required. Open up, you piece of shit. Voice code accepted, lockdown disabled, retribution protocol disabled, safety protocol disabled. Welcome home. I let out a sigh of relief. I knew the magic would work but I hadn't been able to test the protocols, for obvious reasons. Despite the obvious violence of the defensive measures, the runes used were quite simple. I added a lightning trap rune connected to a sensor rune, a few different sensor runes actually. This way the defenses could be triggered in any number of ways. Adding the mana cannons into the defenses had come later and they had to be manually hooked up to the system for them to fire and they could only fire one time. Unlike the other defenses, which were linked to the 3 mana hearts. The audio warning was a bit much and I made a mental note to modify it later. It was really only there to deter friendlies but I don't think there was enough delay time between the warning and the activation for most people to escape. The charred bodies were proof of that. Those weren't the only defenses on the fortress, but they were the only ones to have activated. Alright, it's safe to approach. I turned back to the damage on the door and sighed. It was going to take time to fix. I activated my tattoo and the door unsealed itself but the automatic open function was damaged. I slid my good hand through one of the rents and pulled the heavy metal door open. Inside was another desiccated husk. I wasn't surprised. I pried his dead hand off the button marked open inner door and tossed the corpse outside. I waited for the others before I closed the exterior door and cycled the inner door. Without a tattoo or one of my identity plates, you weren't getting in that easily. It was quickly determined that nothing else had been damaged, at least inside the fortress. The shield and cloak gems had been drained by the activity but the main power gem still had just over 1,000 mana. That gave me an accurate time frame of events. It was less than 3 hours after we were spotted leaving the dungeon. I disabled the defensive program, a simple switch that physically disconnected the power flow to those runes. They sure didn't waste any time trying to steal from us, I said bluntly. Oh, Fiona said, floating to stand next to me. Yeah, less than 3 hours after we were spotted. It makes me think they were trying to get in for some time before that. I wouldn't doubt it, Fiona replied, a flying magical construct of this size would be a prized possession for any city. Yeah, Well, let's hope they learned their lesson. Ska, are we secure? Yes, he hissed happily. Good, let's get strapped in and get the hell out of this shithole. Chapter 119, The Way Forward. As we flew back to Houston, I had plenty of time to think. My mind kept going back to Randy Cotton and his power to bend fate. I knew I couldn't avoid fighting him for much longer, he was becoming too strong. I also knew even hitting level 20 and picking a second class would not bring me to his level. No, I needed help. Thankfully I had some good friends and a few new allies to call upon to assist. Before we got to that point though, we set down near a rundown steel mill, north of Texas. There was a level 15 dungeon here, one that Fiona had spotted on our way north. But there were also a lot of monsters roaming the area around the abandoned buildings. I would only need a few quick kills to level up, then I could decide on my ultimate choice for second class. I hit the hideous spider-like creature with an electrified stunning gust, causing it to screech and flail its front appendages. Those appendages were speckled with lamprey-like orifices that easily drew blood and tore skin if they got a hold of you. Each of the 6 fat hairy legs had these suckers on them, connected to a fat hairy torso with dozens of gleaming red eyes. La Prashu level 14. They were not slow, able to scurry quickly along the crooked and broken ground as they attacked. They also had a leap attack that used all 6 legs to try and attach to their victim. I had been a bit surprised by their mobility, and I had the bleeding wounds to show for it. Ska and Fiona were easily able to keep out of reach. Ska with his enhanced speed and Fiona by just phasing out as they jumped on her. I was a bit envious. I also wished I still had my armor shield, but that was damaged along with my armor. I killed the stunned creature I was fighting and moved on to the next. By the time we had cleared out the 8 La Prashu, I had leveled up. I was also covered in bile green ichor and needed a shower badly. We made our way back to the fortress to clean up and so I could level and choose my next path. I sat in my study before opening up my messages to see what I received. You have reached level 20, modifiers increased by 1. 5 free attribute points available. Song of Carnage, increases crit chance by 20% for 30 minutes 20m range, cost 150 mana, cooldown 1 HOUR. Word of Power, your word is law. All within a 25m radius that have a lower endurance score than your intelligence score, must obey your every word for 15s, cost 500m1 permanent intelligence point. I took both abilities, although I winced at the cost for Word of Power. It was like my ultimate attack though, so I couldn't complain too much. Would it be enough for me to kill Randy Cotton? I wasn't sure. I wasn't even sure I wanted to use it. I placed my ability points and looked at my new stats. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter level 20. Strength, 15, plus 2, modifier x21. Endurance, 20 modifier x39. Agility, 17, plus 2, modifier x21. Perception, 17 modifier x21. Intelligence, 25 modifier x39. Wisdom, 15 modifier x21. Charisma, 11 modifier x21. Luck, 15 modifier x21. HP, 780, 858. Mana, 975. Mana Regen, M315. My mana saw the largest boost due to my sticking 3 points into the attribute. I needed to unlock my endurance stat soon or I would quickly plateau once I picked my second class. Speaking of second classes, I didn't see any pop-up for it. I had to dig around my menus for the better part of an hour before I found the option. It wasn't exactly hidden, but it wasn't obvious either. A small circle had appeared in my stat sheet, next to my name. I had overlooked it until I got frustrated and mentally tried opening everything. The massive list of available classes unfurled in front of me, along with actual information for a change. I had decided not to wait to choose a second class, this would give me the most time to level up whatever I chose. Congratulations on reaching level 20. Because of your outstanding drive, you are given the option of choosing a second class. This choice comes with benefits but also downsides. With the new class, you will gain 5 attribute points for every 5 levels. The second class starts at level 1 base experience. You must select which class to assign experience to. This cannot be changed but once a day. With your new class, your base modifier will not increase until your highest level class exceeds the previous highest class level. Honestly, it wasn't that bad of a downside. Sure, I would have to split experience but I could quickly level my second class to 10. It was better than dual classing from level 1. While those people were strong at early levels, they would have an increasingly more difficult time leveling with the 3 times experience penalty per level. My biggest downside was losing out on the modifier bonus. It was a bit of a downer, but I would survive. Would you like to choose a second class? Y/N. I took a deep breath before selecting yes. The screen blocking the massive list of classes winked out. I had no rush as I could choose a class anytime before level 21. That being said, I needed to level my new class sooner, rather than later. I had a feeling the Black Dragon would move again soon. The first thing I did was look up my enemies' classes. Fate Spinner. A Fate Spinner is an advanced class that allows the wielder to control fate to some extent. Whether this means avoiding a deadly blow, blocking a missed attack, or puppeteering the very fabric of fate. Beware, doing so has consequences. Would you like to pick this class? Y/N. I selected no and moved on to the next class. Tempus Mech. The Temporal Sword is an advanced class that lets you utilize time alterations to confuse your enemies and make your attacks harder to counter and predict. You may even rewind your personal time frame to heal grievous or deadly wounds. Along with this class, you age at an accelerated rate based on skill usage. No person can escape the embrace of time. I selected no on this class as well, but I did look at the class skills, at least the few levels that the system showed. It seemed like that had been another feature damaged by the tampering of the system. Looking at the skills gave me a good approximation of what Randy Cotton was capable of. It also told me something I had been dreading. Sever Fate. Use this skill to cause a wound that cannot be regenerated. Up until this point I still held on to hope that killing that son of a bitch would allow the magic holding my healing up to disperse. Now I knew that wasn't an option. I moved on to the list, checking dozens of classes, based on what I had discussed with Fiona. I felt that none of them were really a fit and moved on to my final choice. I took a look at pure magic classes, pure combat classes, even enchanting classes to enhance the capabilities of the fortress. I decided against going that route. While the fortress was a powerful construct, it couldn't be with me all the time. I had a few main issues with my current class. One was my ability to fight effectively with a weapon. Some of that was negated with my training, which now that I had the advanced staff skill meant I needed to go see Old Man Trumbo again. But I would never be as competent with a weapon as someone like Randy Cotton that had trained for decades. My skills lay in being unpredictable to my enemy. It was the reason Randy had so easily torn me apart. He had a grasp on all of my skills and tricks. Similar to how I just looked up his. Even the few non-class skills I had, wouldn't surprise him for long. Anyone who reached level 20 and looked up my class could determine my greatest weakness, my casting, and exploit that. Sure, I had a few spells that avoided this issue thanks to my dungeon clearing escapade. But those only amounted to so much. I needed to be unpredictable again. It took some finagling of the search criteria to find the types of classes I was looking for. The ones that fit my search were few in number, only returning 3 results. Bringer of Oblivion. Darkness will consume the world but not before the Bringer of Oblivion consumes all skills. All consumed skills are lost to Oblivion to power your own skills. 0.25% damage increase per skill level of skill consumed. Maw of the Void. This class allows you to randomly claim skills from opponents. You may also choose to sacrifice these skills to the Void in return for other gifts. Dark Jester. Your attacks have a chance to steal the opponent's skills, rendering them inert for a period of time. I looked over the classes and the skills they provided. While Bringer of Oblivion sounded like the strongest class, I had a concern. One of the abilities it gave was an AoE attack that consumed all active abilities, destroying them forever. My concern was the fact that it didn't have a target designation like my current abilities. Even my AoE abilities said, AoE ally or enemy, that skill simply said nothing. It also didn't give me the unpredictability I was after. I decided to avoid that class. Maw of the Void was more along the lines of what I was looking for. It had some significant downsides though. For one, it had only 3 class abilities. The main one allowing for a guaranteed chance to capture a random ability from your target. I moved on to the Dark Jester. The class had skills that made it a combination rogue/trap maker with the ability to suppress abilities for some time. I didn't feel that it fit with my fighting style though. Also, it relied on short swords and daggers as its weapon proficiency. It might have been an interesting class to pick up on day 1, but I was too set in my ways to switch weapon focus now. It made my choice easy for me as I selected Maw of the Void. While I couldn't choose the ability I stole, the class did allow me to use the abilities I stole, which was exactly what I needed. It would be impossible for someone that didn't know me to counter unknown abilities. I looked at the system message. Maw of the Void, this class allows you to randomly claim skills from opponents. You may also choose to sacrifice these skills to the Void in return for other gifts. Class skills at level 1. Basic hand-to-hand proficiency. Sunder skill, 100% chance to randomly claim a skill from your opponent. Requires an open skill slot or skill is lost to the Void, cost 100 mana, cooldown 1 per fight. 1x free skill slot. The class was not a human class, it came from a species of octopod-like creatures according to the info page, hence the hand-to-hand combat. That was fine, I already fought with my fists on occasion, so learning to incorporate that wouldn't be too hard. Definitely less trouble than trying to be proficient with daggers and swords. I stood up, it was time to test out my new class and level. We came out of the dungeon and I was in a crabby mood. While I had leveled the new class to 6, I hadn't gotten a single ability from the monsters inside. I had my theories about why, but choose to wait and test them. I assigned my new stat points and checked out my new skills. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter / Maw of the Void level 26. Strength, 17, plus 2, modifier x21. Endurance, 20 modifier x39. Agility, 18, plus 2, modifier x21. Perception, 18 modifier x21. Intelligence, 25 modifier x39. Wisdom, 15 modifier x21. Charisma, 11 modifier x21. Luck, 16 modifier x21. HP, 780, 858. Mana, 975. Mana Rigon, M315. I had decided to increase some of my other attributes this time around. Reclaim, sacrifice a skill to the Void to reclaim a skill slot, cost 100M, cooldown 1 day. Void Lottery, sacrifice 2 skills to the Void for a random skill from the Void. Require an open skill slot or skill is lost along with the skills sacrificed. 6x free skill slots. The level 5 skill Void Lottery was interesting. It was one of the reasons I had decided to add a few points into luck. I didn't know if it would help over much, but it couldn't hurt. I held off on using it for now until I figured out the issue with my main skill for the class. I had 9 free skill slots now, so that wasn't the issue. The skill had gone off, draining the mana from my pool, but either the creatures I was fighting had no skills or weren't compatible for some reason. The trip wasn't a complete loss. I got a new title and open slot for helping to clear the dungeon. The Hunter, 10% additional damage on dark-aligned creatures. We packed up and completed our trip to Houston. Ska and Fiona went to fetch the Marshal and Martin, for a meeting, while I made my way to the bazaar. I needed to commission something and get my armor repaired or replaced. A few hours later I met the Marshal and Martin at that coffee shop. I saw Martin wince as he saw my prosthetic. The Marshal only raised a curious eyebrow. "It's not as bad as it looks," I said as I took a seat. "You sure about that? It looks pretty bad," Martin stated. I shrugged. "Trust me, losing a hand is better than dying. I suppose. What's with the metal fingers?" I smiled, spinning the hand and actuating the fingers. "It's also a mana cannon," I said, trusting the two to keep my secret. "Gijus," Martin replied, "is that even safe? It's no more dangerous than wielding magic." The Marshal cut in, "So, Paul, what was this important meeting for? I assume it has something to do with why you lost a hand." I nodded. "We were up north when we found a Mohe city, they are mole people. Also kind of pricks. Anyway, they dug a tunnel through the spine. We decided to check it out." "Seems odd of you," Martin said. "At the time it didn't. I'll tell you why in a minute. We got through the tunnel, a trip of 2 weeks, through all kinds of underground biomes. The Mohe had established a city on either end. The problem came when we exited on the eastern side of the spine. Without warning, we were attacked. I managed to identify my attacker as Randy Cotton, the leader of the Black Dragon." "What? How did he even find you?" "His class. He is a dual-class Fate Spinner and Tempus Mech, the second one translates to Temporal Sword. I can only assume he used some ability of his to force an encounter between us. If it wasn't for Fiona and Ska, I would be dead. I barely survived the attack, not even scratching the man. He was level 23 in his main class and level 15 in his second. I had no chance, but I couldn't escape. I told the remaining story of how Ska and Fiona saved me, my falling out with the Mohe Council and losing my hand. That's a lot to take in, Paul, the Marshal said. So these Mohe aren't likely to become allies. Doubtful, but I have a way to reduce or even remove their monopoly on the only pass through the spine. I told them about my idea for the magical barges. That could work in the short term, but we would need to assign someone with mana to oversee the transits. Once commerce picks up, it would become a full-time duty. I don't know if anyone is willing to take on that responsibility. The Marshal had a good point. I had another option, but it would be some time before that was completed. Well, let's table that for now. The real reason I brought you here is that I need help. It's become glaringly obvious that Randy Cotton and the remaining Black Dragon are actively hunting for me. We need to take the fight to them since they have likely retreated to Chicago. The Marshal asked. You said you would help if I needed it. I will help, but I was thinking more around the Texas area or the South. I can't spare a contingent of men to fly all the way to Chicago with you. I deflated as the Marshal looked apologetic. I understand. I can do it alone if I must, but there is no guarantee I will survive. You won't be alone, Martin replied. I'm coming with. I thought you were busy with diplomatic talks. They are in a holding pattern while the summit gets scheduled. That could take weeks or months. Plus I have my own score to settle with those fuckers. I wish I could join you, but my place is here. You can still help, Marshal. Give me the bounty notices on the most dangerous criminals you have. You sure about that? I nodded. All right, stop by the office after you two are done, I'll have them ready to go. Try not to take any unnecessary risks. Thanks for your help, Marshal. The man nodded before walking off. I clapped Martin on the shoulder. The band is back together. He rolled his eyes, but I saw the smile creep onto his face. Chapter 120, Random Chance. We spent a few days resupplying in Houston before we set out. So, what's the plan? Martin asked as he followed me on board. First I need to pick up some new abilities. He looked at me in confusion. Why didn't you do that in the bazaar? Why pay, when I can get them for free? I said with a wink. Part of your new class. I nodded. Well, this ought to be interesting. Ska and Fiona greeted us in the kitchen as I went over the plan. First we take out these contracts for the Marshal. Try to keep as many alive as possible. I want to try my skill on all of them to see what comes up. I figure with our speed and ability to track these men we can probably finish in a few days. Then we head for the Jackal Pit. Ska gave a toothy grin and growled happily at this news. I set out 2 rings I had purchased with that destination in mind. These are mind barrier rings. They should be able to protect us for 6 hours, enough time to clear that dungeon. If my theory is correct and I gain the skill I'm looking for there, we can head to one last dungeon. I wanted to hit up Suburbia again to get the abilities that Krager the champion possessed. This was all assuming I could get abilities from monsters. The Jackal Pit would give me that answer. We found the first group of outlaws, camped out in a shallow swell, deep in the Texas countryside. They would have been nearly impossible to locate without the Reaper title. There were around a dozen of them, ranging from level 8 to level 14. We descended on them in the dark and they had little time to put up a defense before we mowed through the guards. I also learned that my new ability Sunder skill affected anyone that attacked me. Knowing this I used Beacon on the 4 survivors before we finished them off. They were a capable lot of outlaws, they would have to have been, considering they had survived for so long, but they couldn't keep up with our skills and enchanted gear. That's the last of them, Martin said, recalling his summoned creature. Good, you guys loot, I need to see what skills I gained. I looked over the 4 new skills. Acidic coating, coat your blade with a potent acid, does not affect the weapon. Cost 10 mana 10 stamina, cooldown 2 minutes. Escape, a short-range teleport that allows you to shift up to 20 feet. Cannot be used to close in on target. Cost 10 mana 30 stamina, cooldown 1 hour. Puncture, adds penetrating power to your attacks, allowing you to negate up to 5 armor points. Cost 5 mana 15 stamina, cooldown 1 minute. Double Strike, causes your next attack to deal double the weapon damage. Cost 10 mana 15 stamina, cooldown 1 minute. The skills I captured were not really anything spectacular. It was weird seeing a stamina cost. I had never had the stat on my page before, probably because it would have been useless information, considering my abilities all used mana, but there it was now. A new bar appeared under my mana bar. It looked like it took base strength times base endurance as a calculation, but it also added in my boost. Stamina, 340, 380. It was a small amount, and it made me realize this was probably why non-magic classes didn't use as many abilities as magic classes did. That being said, they could outlast a caster, considering the stamina ribbon was based on the strength modifier times endurance modifier. Stamina ribbon, M819. At my level, I recovered almost 14 stamina a second. That was more than enough for me to spam abilities until I got bored or my target died. Although, I can't imagine most people that relied on stamina, stuck a bunch of points in intelligence. There wouldn't be any point, seeing as even with a base 10 intelligence they could easily get above 300 mana. That would be more than enough to feed these abilities. I decided to hold on to double strike. I would have held on to acidic coating, but it didn't activate on my staff, it only worked when I pulled out Fiona's old sword. I decided to use Void Lottery on escape and puncture to see what I got. The sensation of skills getting ripped away was unpleasant to say the least. In its place, a new skill was shoved into my soul. Reflect the damage of an attack to the attacker. Must be used within 2 seconds of the attack. Cost 20 mana, 25 stamina, cooldown 10 minutes. It was better than what I gave up, but it meant I actually had to take the damage, which kind of sucked. We wrapped up here and moved on to the next target. We cleared out the remaining 3 groups of outlaws. I didn't get any noteworthy abilities from them and used Void Lottery to try and get something better. Nightwalker, you are 30% harder to see in the dark, duration 30 minutes, cost 40 mana, 10 stamina. Cooldown 1 hour. Summon Clay Pot, you can summon an inert clay pot that can hold 1 gallon. Cost 2 mana. Cooldown 5 minutes. Arcane Bolt, fire a bolt of arcane energy that deals int x.15 modifier damage to one target within 20 m. Cost 50 mana. Cooldown 2 minutes. Wall of Thorns, conjure a 5-foot high, 10-foot long wall of sharp thorns. Thorns deal 5 damage a second and reduce agility by 2 for anything caught in the spell. Cost 75 mana. Cooldown 40 minutes. After sacrificing the other skills, this is what I was left with. Not everything was a winner, but I would need to wait another day to try again. This left me with 6 open skill slots, technically 7 if I included the one I had from clearing the underground horde dungeon. I decided to hold off on using Reclaim for the moment. I could use it mid-battle if I needed to free up a slot. But I was leveling quicker than I could fill the slots. That was another advantage of dealing with higher level enemies. I was now level 8 in my second class. Fiona had finally hit level 17, catching up to Martin. It wasn't surprising, considering he had spent a month playing negotiator while we had fought off a massive amount of creatures. I didn't begrudge the man his time off. It seemed to have settled him and given him the time he needed to grieve over his sister's death. I knew once we finished off the Black Dragon he would bow out again to continue his work with the Marshal. I was okay with that. We landed back in Houston and Martin dropped off the bounties. I picked up my finished commission from the bazaar and we left. All in all, we hadn't been back more than 2 hours. With our goal in sight, it was too important to get there quickly as possible. The only detours allowed were to hit those 2 dungeons. I needed at least one of those skills to even the playing field with Randy Cotton. The flight south of the spine was quiet and uneventful. Using a telescope, I was able to see our entrance into the dwarven stronghold was still visible. There were no signs that anyone had been there since we last came through. We flew over that unnamed coastal town where the cartel had taken over. Nobody below noticed us as we passed overhead, the cloak rendering us invisible to the eyes below. I did track Kurt as we flew past. I wanted to get a better feel for that title and how accurate it was. Turns out, pretty accurate. I watched the man through the remote viewer until we were out of sight. It seemed the city hadn't changed much since we came through. We passed over the barren rocky wasteland beyond the plateau of the town, heading northwest. Our trip was much faster this time around as I set the fortress down half a mile from the entrance. As soon as the outer door opened, the unmistakable scent of sulfur washed over me. My endurance was high enough that I didn't bother covering my nose this time. Ska wasn't so lucky and he pushed a gnomish rebreather into his nostrils. Martin just used a nose plug as we hurried toward the entrance. As we grew closer we could already hear the maddening laughter of the jackals. I didn't have to signal the others as we each activated the rings. I donned my armor and staff and we rushed toward the entrance that had been cleared of debris. The first skill I got was Sneak Attack. This proved my theory, I could only gain skills from sentient enemies. I caught a group of 5 jackals in my wall of thorns while the others tore them apart. I gained another skill called underhanded blow. I would have to look at them later as the fighting grew more intense. It wasn't until our 4th encounter that I finally got the skill I had been aiming for. Maddening Laugh inflicts madness debuff on all enemies within hearing range. Bypasses any attempt to negate sound. This insidious spell pierces the mind of its foe, unseen until noticed. Intelligence and wisdom are lowered by 1 point for each stack. Lasts 1 hour or becomes permanent if stats reach 0. Cost 200 mana. Cooldown 10 minutes. I was glad I had chosen to go with an item that defended the mind rather than simply blocking out the sound. If I had thought myself safe from the effects, I might not have even noticed until it was too late this time. With my mission accomplished, we dove into the creatures with a fury born of past frustrations. It took a little over an hour to clear the warrens and tunnels of the dungeon. There were a few simple traps that would collapse areas or cause you to trip and fall into a spit of deadly poison spikes, but our attributes were high enough that it allowed us to avoid these simple traps. The only victim was Martin's summon. It had been crushed when it set off one of the rockfall traps, too stupid to avoid it. Martin had decided not to resummon anything as it was more a hindrance than a help at that point. The boss jackal turned out to be some sort of demonic half-breed shaman. With its enhanced musculature and size, it resembled more a pure werewolf than its lesser brethren. Despite its vaunted size and a higher level of 19, it couldn't take on the 4 of us. The fight didn't last long as the 3 of us distracted it, pulling its malevolent magic as Fiona circled around behind the creature and stabbed it through the head. With these creatures cleared out, the dungeon would return to its natural denizens, no longer spawning the jackals. It was a similar situation to the goblin dungeon I had run across. They had cleared out the normal monsters and taken up residence. So long as the boss remained, the dungeon would respawn any losses. This only worked for borderline monsters though, humans or fully sentient creatures couldn't take advantage of this effect. Even Ska's people were considered too sentient for this to work unless they reverted to a feral state. Goblins, while sentient, were considered nothing more than a monster, same with the undead. The rules of the system were often confusing and in flux, so things tended to change from time to time. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to ponder the complexities of the system and dungeons. The boss was dead and I had earned a new ability from him. Orb of Darkness. If this orb hits its target, it will be inflicted with a random curse. Curse lasts for 24 hours. Spell cannot be recast until the curse is broken. Cost 100 mana. Cooldown 24 hours or when curse broken. Curse of Weakness, -3 Strength. Curse of Apathy, -3 Endurance. Curse of Sloth, 3 Agility. Curse of Myopia, -3 Perception. Curse of Feeble Mind, -3 Intelligence. Curse of Infirmity, -3 Wisdom. Curse of Leprosy, -3 Charisma. Curse of the Fool, -3 Luck. It was one hell of a spell and I was glad the boss hadn't had a chance to use it on any of us. I checked out the other abilities as well, seeing as I hadn't gotten any others after getting Maddening Laugh. It seems if I claimed the same skill I just wouldn't get it. And like Ska's people, they didn't have a large range of abilities. Sneak Attack. If you can ambush your opponent, your attack deals 3x damage. Cost 5 mana 25 stamina. Cooldown 1 minute. Underhanded Blow. Aiming for sensitive areas enhances your agility by 2 for that attack. Cost 5 mana 5 stamina. Cooldown 10 sec. Sneak Attack was pretty useless for the way I fought, but Underhanded Blow might come in handy until I found something better. I wasn't a stranger to striking an opponent's weak spots or fighting dirty. Clearing the dungeon netted some credits, but at this point, I stopped counting. I had more than I could spend, even after the item that I commissioned in the bazaar. If I needed more money, I would just create some magic weapons. It was no wonder the Enchanting Guild had become so powerful and influential. The last bonus we got from the dungeon was a title. Iron Mind. You are 25% less susceptible to mind-affecting magic. My second class had hit level 9 early on in the dungeon and I was looking forward to the additional points for level 10. Looting the bodies was left to Ska. I didn't see anything these creatures had that I wanted. He got a stack of spears, some poison vials and a cursed staff. We decided to leave the cursed staff behind. It was more wizard stick than beating stick, so I had no use for it. Martin could use it, but he opted not to take it. Can't say I blamed him there. I used Void Lottery on Sneak Attack and summoned Clay Pot and got a spell called Gangrenous Discharge in return. Gangrenous Discharge. Pustules cover your body, growing until they explode, delivering a foul bath of bodily fluids on anyone within 5 feet. Contact with this substance causes the affected target or targets to contract the disease debuff and take 10 HP/S damage. They also grow these pustules as well. Spell keeps going as long as new targets are within range. Just the description of the spell made me gag. I would not be trying this one out, I didn't care how good it might be.